Welcome to The Spin Room, the show where we take the top stories and cut through the spin and messages the politicians want you to swallow whole. I'm Eylon Levy, and on the panel today, two journalists who will help us unpack the spin. They've also promised to disagree on just about every topic. Akiva Bigman from Israel Hayom and Rogel Alpha from Haaretz. Welcome to both of you. On our spin diet today, first of all, another lethal Palestinian terror attack in the West Bank. We'll look around the spin about deterring terrorism. Secondly, the Trump administration all but declares war on the Palestinian Authority. Is Trump taking Israel's side or actually setting a ticking time bomb under the country? And thirdly, Israel is under pressure not to demolish the Palestinian Bedouin village of Khan al-Ahmar. Is Israel enforcing the law in the West Bank or violating international law in a major way? Our discussion will revolve around those subjects, and we'll start with today's top story. A Palestinian teenager stabbed and killed an Israeli man in a West Bank mall south of Jerusalem. The victim, father of four, Ari Fuld, was a right-wing activist who had been on this show and on i24NEWS before. Fuld was stabbed, then managed to shoot his own attacker before collapsing and succumbing to his wounds. And that happened as Israel's defense minister vowed that under his watch, no convicted terrorists will leave prison even an hour before their sentence is up. He was reacting to a reported army proposal that would give terrorists in Israeli jails access to a parole committee and hopes for an early release. Akiva, let's start with you. The IDF proposal, according to these reports, would allow convicted terrorists who are serving life sentences to have access to a parole board, just like people who've committed other offenses. What do you have to say about that?
Yeah, I'd like to say, first of all, a few words about Ali, because actually I happened to know him non-directly. He was like me, a panelist, also on this show and other shows. I kind of heard of him all the time. It was a week before me at this show, a week after me at that show. I always heard his name. I heard about him. I heard about his doings, and it's a very sorrowful incident. So I just wanted to say that. About this discussion, I think, well, dealing with terrorists is different with dealing with other detainees. They have different rights. They have the situation is different, and the situation
is different. But all the same, you could have someone. It's possible to imagine who, if they've undergone genuine rehabilitation and expressed remorse, you shouldn't lock someone away and throw away the key. Perhaps is what the IDF is saying.
Yeah, but you're not throwing away the key. I mean, there are the sentences. They have a deadline. Some of them, a lot of them get released. Sometimes with deals. Sometimes with also when they exceed their sentence. It's not forever, unless they're serious terrorists and they killed a lot of people, and then they should never get out of jail. That's
Rogel, what do you make of this proposal that would give convicted terrorists a chance to get out of jail early?
Well, it seems to me that the IDF is looking for ways to alleviate the despair in Palestinian society. I mean, I can't think of any other motivation for the IDF to come up with this idea.
In which case, Akiva, there could be a strategic advantage for Israel, at least, if the IDF seems to think that, that giving people hope of release is something
I oppose this idea if it's taken by the IDF. I think it's terribly wrong.
The argument is there any effective deterrence against terrorism? And, you know, I would argue that there isn't. There isn't in a situation where there is an occupation and Palestinians, you know, young Palestinians are born into it and they see no future and they see no horizons. This despair is going to beget terrorism and the tragic terror attack, which is obviously, I mean, it's to be condemned. This is not, it's not productive in any way.
Let's put it this way then. You know, you say that the occupation begets terrorism, and yet after every terrorist attack, we have politicians on the right who say the response is to double down, to build more settlements, to make it clear we're not going anywhere. And your side of the political map, the left, struggles to make that argument in Israeli society and convince people that actually perhaps the response should be to end the occupation. Why do you think that is?
Why do I think that what?
That you struggle to persuade the Israeli public of this line of argument?
The Israeli public is bought into the narrative where there is no occupation, or it's a righteous occupation, or it is not the reason for terrorism. Terrorism stems from fundamentalist Islamic jihadist world, global ISIS, and so on and so forth. And I make the differentiation between ISIS terrorism and between terrorism that is lone wolf, young people.
So you're suggesting if Israel then withdraws to the 1967 lines, ends the occupation, that's it? Palestinian terrorism goes away?
Well, I don't know if Palestinian terrorism goes away. I think that the Palestinians need to find a viable, future and statehood and way of realizing their goals. But obviously, I think that the occupation is immoral. I think that it will always beget terrorism. There is nothing that will deter desperate people living under occupation.
Kiva, what do you make of this line of argument?
You can wreck their homes, you can take away their parole hearings, anything.
One of the things I like about Rugel is them being very honest, and the truth is that terrorism has nothing to do with the occupation. We had suffered from Arab or Palestinian terrorism since the beginning of Zionism. There's been terrorism for almost forever. It changed its forms, it changed names, it changed reasoning, it changed excuses given by people on the left. So we always had terrorism. If Israel, God forbid, leaves Judea and Samaria, so maybe this form of terrorism might stop, but we'll get way worse terrorism. We'll have rockets, we'll have everything we see from Gaza Strip happening now. The reasons for terrorism are way deeper than anything we can think about in this political context. So the only possible solution is to fight terrorism as strong as you can. And history proves that there are ways to deter terrorists. There are ways to win the war on terror, and also the Israel history proves that.
I have a question.
Israel has managed to stop terrorism in several incidents in the past.
Let's have a dialogue here. I'm interested in this.
I normally get to ask the questions, but Rogel, I'll derogate to you now.
This is interesting. The IDF and the Shin Bet both agree that terrorism from the West Bank stems inter alia from the occupation and from despair, and they're looking for ways to alleviate this. First of all, they're not leftists, okay? Their interest is Israel's security, and and why do you think that if there are means of oppressing terror or deterring terror, why don't the Shin Bet and the IDF just do it?
Well, they do, and they do it successfully. And we have a level.
I think
we have a level.
This terror
we have a level. So I want to explain. The level of terrorism we see in the last few years is way, way lower than the historical level Israel knew ever before the occupation, after the occupation. So Israel actually won the war on terror. Now we have this lone wolf, so-called, as you said, so-called terrorism of lone wolves. That's a different story, has different motivations. But the way to fight the terrorism is not to get out of Judea and Samaria and then have the major Hamas
terrorism. We are going to have to leave that
back.
disagreement floating because we have so much more to argue about. The Trump administration and the Palestinian Authority aren't exactly on speaking terms. In fact, they're not talking at all. Trump recognized Jerusalem as Israel's capital. President Abbas gave a speech saying he hoped Trump's house would burn down, and it's all gone downhill from there. The Trump administration slashing funds to the Palestinians' UN Refugee Agency, cutting all aid, closing the PLO's mission in Washington, all while promising to unveil eventually a peace plan. So is the Trump White House advancing peace by pressuring the Palestinians to the table, or setting up a crisis that will blow in everyone's faces? Rogel, let me ask you first. Trump is often spoken of as being the first post-truth president who plays hard and fast with facts, but it seems to me here, actually, he's doing the whole international community and the truth a favor by getting rid of this ridiculous fiction that 70 years after the war that created the Palestinian refugee crisis, that their fourth-generation descendants are still refugees. Coming and saying these Palestinians, their millions of descendants, are no longer refugees, that's a step towards the truth.
First of all, if you listen to the voices emanating out of the West Bank, if it's Saeb Erekat or Abu Mazen, then you know that whatever dialogue could have been established with the Palestinian Authority is being lost. And you cannot reach any...
But on the question of refugees, standing up and saying it makes no sense to define the Palestinians under a different definition from the rest of the world.
I don't know of any case in which either the PLO or the PA were demanding that in a final settlement, millions of Palestinian refugees would have been given the right of return.
Or the right of return. They insist it's a right that applies to every refugee.
It has always been understood by the Palestinians that in the final, solution, be it a two-state solution or whatever solution, there would not be a right of return for millions of Palestinians.
We're going to have to continue the discussion on that, but we have to go for a break in 5 seconds, Rogel. We're going for a break. We'll be right back.
i24NEWS.
I'm I'm Lauren Izzo on i24 News. Join me on high definition right here for an in-depth understanding of Israel's diverse society in groundbreaking documentaries.
There's more to the news than meets the eye. Many voices, many faces, with interests often at odds. We take you deeper beyond the headlines, inside the drama, the controversy, bringing you fresh insights into the conflicts, breakthroughs, heartaches, and victories shaping our world. Perspectives. There's more than just one view.
Unflinching, opinionated. Weeknights David Schuster and Tal Heinrich bring you analysis, interviews, and opinions that connect us to the Middle East and the world. Watch Crossroads weeknights starting at 6 p.m. Eastern, only on i24 News.
I'm Shayna Stulin. Here on Take 30, you'll get a fresh take on the day's biggest stories with our panel of experts and in-the-know journalists. Plus, we'll bring you a conversation with today's newsmakers, artists, and influencers. And all of it in under 30 minutes.
I'm Khaled Ben David.
And I'm Nareet Ben.
Join us on The Rundown here in the heart of the Middle East for a candid conversation.
A closer look at the stories born out of this region and driving changes all the way to Washington.
Welcome back to the Spin Room. We are here with our panelists, Rogel, Alpha, and Akiva. Bigman, let's pick up the discussion we had before about the crisis between the Palestinian Authority and the Trump administration. The Trump administration taking an unprecedented step of cutting funds to the UN's Palestinian Refugee Agency, saying these millions of descendants of the original refugees are no longer refugees. Before the break, Rogel was saying that it's always been known from the Palestinian side that they're not going to demand a full return of refugees to Israel.
Far from it.
Okay, well, that's your claim. But Akiva, would you say that actually the Trump administration's move on this is actually a great contribution to the truth and cutting through what has been based on spin from the international community?
I don't know where Rogel gets this idea that was never serious. They're never serious about the right of return. They were always serious. It was always on the table. But more than the issue in the talks, the main issue is those refugee camps where millions of people are kept in the refugee status. And the second move the Trump administration is supposed to do, at least as reported, is to talk to these Arab countries where these Palestinians live today and to make them residents, citizens of those countries. That's the real issue. That will solve the problem, because these people, some of them in Jordan, some of them in Lebanon and Syria, they don't have a exact status in those countries.
Well, except in Jordan they do. They're all Jordanian citizens.
Not all of them. But in Lebanon and Syria, they're definitely not. And once they get a permanent status in their countries, then you really have the refugee issue off the table. And I think that's a good service, actually, for a moderate, maybe future Palestinian leadership, because now he was forced to get this issue off the table, and then he can move forward.
If you would like to see Israel and the Palestinians reach a peace agreement, then surely taking off that illusion that there will be any Palestinian return to Israel, taking that spin off the table would be a positive step.
I don't think that the spin is real, okay? I think that Palestinian society understands that there will not be a right of return for millions.
So
there will be.
Wait a minute. What gives you reason to think that they understand that when every Palestinian leader has said it's a right that applies to every refugee?
That's sort of a symbolic stance, but when you look at proposals for agreements, be it Abu Mazen Olmert or Abu Mazen Beilin, you see that the size of the right of return they're talking about is something very symbolic of tens of thousands of people, and that's it. Look, the IDF, and again, I'm going to cite them, is telling the government we need to step in instead of UNRWA in Gaza if we don't want a total collapse there into total even more apocalyptic, living conditions there, even more apocalyptic situation there, which will obviously engender, more terror and more tension and more trouble.
So let me pick up on that, Rogel.
I'm not worried about Lebanon and Syria. I'm worried about what's in our backyard.
Let's pick up on that exactly on the West Bank. Akiva, the Trump administration, many would like to say, Trump is the most pro-Israel president, but just in the last few weeks, he's cut money to Palestinian cancer patients in East Jerusalem. He's cut money to coexistence projects. Those don't look like pro-Israel policies. They don't look like something Israel's been lobbying for. And taking aid away from the Palestinian Authority will only increase the burden on a cash-strapped Palestinian Authority or ultimately Israel.
The Israeli taxpayer.
Won't it?
Well, the idea is to put pressure on the Palestinian Authority, and I think it's good that he's taking these moves. There are different solutions for specific problems on the ground that can be taken, and maybe different funds can come in for different organizations if needed. But the main idea is to stop the Palestinian Authority.
Taking money away from Palestinian cancer patients in East Jerusalem is going to put any pressure on Mahmoud Abbas. Come on, seriously.
It's definitely going to put a lot of pressure on Mahmoud Abbas, and I can assure you nothing's going to happen to these cancer patients.
And that pressure you think would make him back down? That pressure you think will make him back down rather than double down that he will not surrender? After all, the question of honor is something that's very important in Palestinian society.
Well, we tried being nice, and we tried addressing the question of honor and the Palestinian Authority for enough years, and maybe putting some pressure on them in certain points will actually gain some results. And I want to remind the viewers that Abu Mazen is kind of old and pretty sick, so maybe the concept, maybe what we're looking for is some kind of leverage onto his hair, actually.
Rogel, method to the madness. Akiva says, put a little bit of pressure on the Palestinian Authority, even if it sounds nasty. You'll bring them to the negotiating table, and those hospitals can get their money back.
It was never about money. It's always about, you mentioned honor, dignity. Let's not be too, let's not engage in too much Orientalism. It's not only Arab-Palestinian society that deems honor very important. It's very important for Israeli society as well. And they have no dignity. And the way in which they are being treated now by the American administration is taking away the only mediator that we had. The Palestinians will no longer recognize them as a mediator. A collapse of Palestinian society following the cessation of the American aid will, in the end, fall on the Israeli taxpayer. We will have to fill in the void that the PA will not be able to.
Rogel, I'm listening to you here say that honor is not important only to the Palestinians, also to Israelis. I agree, and also to the Americans. And surely then the Palestinians cannot expect to have a leader who tells the President of the United States, may your house burn down, and expect to carry on getting handouts from the American taxpayer.
Look, I would expect the American leader to find a different way of getting that message across, that he will not be spoken to or about that way by the Palestinian Authority leader. The way in which he has chosen to go about it is the wrong way. It's alienating the Palestinians. It's taking away the only possible mediator we could have had. It's just making the situation worse.
Look,
I strongly disagree. The whole policy is not a reaction to Abu Mazen saying something, because let's get serious. I mean, Trump.
So what is the strategy, as you understand it?
His reaction for Abu Mazen saying something and Trump ruled is a tweet with capital letters. It's not a whole U.S. policy. Okay, so let's calm down about that. So he has a policy of putting pressure on the Palestinian Authority, plus trying to get off the table some of the issues that stopped any agreement in the past. And the truth is that in this situation is better for Israel. That's what the facts are, because all these issues of Jerusalem, of the refugees, they're all issues that the Palestinians and the Arab world were holding against Israel.
They're off the table.
Oh, come on,
they're off the table. Really believe that President Trump has just taken the issue of refugees off the table like nothing funny.
They're off the table in the sense that the Trump administration, which is a strong power in the world, decided they're off the table, and that means something.
No, it doesn't. Because
will Abu Mazen come to the table? Will his
Europeans are increasing their contributions to
come to the table? We need to wait and see. But this is the dynamics of a negotiation, a tough negotiation. It's something we didn't see yet, and I'm happy to see it. Let's see if it works.
Rogel, your strategy tried. It failed. Let's try his.
My strategy wasn't really tried. No one tried to end the occupation, really. But look, Trump is not in a position to just declare that Jerusalem is off the table or the refugees are off the table and so on and so forth. He's not operating alone in the world. There's, the world there are other superpowers. There's the European Union, there's the Russians, there's the Chinese.
They will be very flattered you called them a superpower.
I think they are.
The US GDP is the whole European Union together, and it passed it. So superpower is a relative,
let's not
issue.
Let's not get into a discussion over whether the European Union is a superpower.
By the way. But
Rogel, you'll want to discuss Khan al-Ahmar. We have to move on because Israel is in a standoff with much of the international community now over a piece of strategic real estate in the West Bank. The Palestinian village of Khan al-Ahmar. Israeli authorities are determined to demolish it after the courts ruled it was built illegally. So far, so fair. Well, the European Parliament is warning Israel that demolishing the village and relocating its residents would be a grave breach of international humanitarian law because it would amount to forcible transfer of population in occupied territory. I want to start actually with this tweet from Israel's Justice Minister Ayelet Shaked. She defends the demolition, saying that the court has found that the buildings were built illegally. The state has offered them to relocate to a new development. They've actually begun building those houses. She says it's highly unfortunate the residents were pressured by the PA into not accepting these solutions that were being used for cynical political purposes. So, Rogel, I have to ask you, if the Israeli court says this was built illegally, the state must enforce planning laws, you must demolish it, on what possible authority can the European Union and the UN expect the Israeli government to ignore its own courts?
Everything going on in the West Bank is illegal. All the Jewish settlements there are totally illegal. There are two systems of justice and law being applied in the West Bank. It's an apartheid system, one for the Jews and one for the Palestinians or the Bedouin and so on and so forth. So there should be no talk here of legality or of justice.
But Rogel, all the sense, Israel is responsible. We can get on to some of those issues later on, Akiva, if you want to respond. But under the Oslo Accords, Israel is responsible for enforcing planning, zoning, and civil law in Area C of the West Bank. That is Israel's responsibility, according to a treaty with the PLO.
I refuse to accept. You want to treat this issue from a very, very specific angle that doesn't take into account what I just said. All the Jewish settlements in the West Bank are illegal. There are two different systems being applied here.
But that doesn't make a difference as to whether, if the court says that Khan al-Ahmar is illegal, the Israeli state cannot ignore its own top court and say, we don't want to demolish it.
Again, I think that the Israeli state is the one who brought forth, the proceedings to go to court and say, this we're going to look only at this building as being illegal. Israel is here, seeing what the consequences of the occupation are in the eyes of all the world except the Trump administration. Okay, and I wouldn't disparage the EU as much as you did earlier. Germany and France and so on and so forth. These are powers, and so is the ICC in The Hague and so on and so forth. And Israel is now paying the price in her international image of her conduct in the West Bank, which is illegal.
Akiva, let me ask you here about this question of legality, because at the moment Israel has a policy of doing absolutely everything possible to legalize, in retrospect, illegal outposts in the West Bank, Jewish settlements, including those built on private Palestinian land, while doing everything possible to try to demolish the Palestinian illegal construction. I mean, that's rank hypocrisy, isn't it?
Well, we need to say one thing about Khan al-Ahmar as far as the facts. Well, this so-called settlement was built on a major road. There's no conditions any settlement of any kind can be on that location, and the Israeli because it's on the main road. It's on the main road. No settlement. You ever been there? It's on the main road like this. No settlement ever is built. Not in Israel, not in the West Bank, wherever. It's not realistic in no way. But there is a neighborhood built for them called Jahalin West. It's very close to Jerusalem. You can see the photos of the lots every family gets. The conditions are way better than anything they have in their current location. And the truth is that these poor people are being played by the Palestinian Authority and the European Union, who's been pouring funds in there to make sure they don't leave. And they've been threatened by violent consequences if they leave. They have people on video saying that live in Khan al-Ahmar, and that's a great story of the place, because without the EU and the PA, these guys would have had nice houses in Jalin West years ago.
So let me ask you, Rogel, specifically about this. If we're talking about Spin, a spokeswoman for Kogat, the Israeli defense body responsible for Palestinian civil affairs, said pretty much we're doing the Palestinians a favor. In fact, she said we're doing them a service because they're living on land that is unfit for habitation. We're willing to relocate them to area. I mean, if I build suddenly in the middle of a park, the state isn't going to offer me free housing, is it?
obviously, we're talking about a symbolic situation. There's some truth in what Akiva just said, okay? Obviously, this event is being used by the different sides in order to, put forth their different agendas. And this is symbolic. If there will be a removal of all the inhabitants of Khan al-Ahmar, this is symbolic of the power that the Israeli occupation has on the Palestinians. And this is why, this is being fought as a human rights issue, as a violation of the Palestinian rights.
Human rights issue, because obviously for the people who actually live there, to go to Jalin West is a better option as far as their human condition. I mean, this is like a theoretical human rights issue, but it's fought on the backs of
an issue
people.
that's being fought out because it's both strategic and symbolic, and the discussion will continue on another day because I'm sure Khan al-Ahmar isn't being demolished tonight. We'll have this discussion again. Rogal Alpha, Akiva Bigman, thank you very much for coming to the spin room. We're taking a break. We'll be back with our press scoop.
i24NEWS.
What is this show about, by the way? This show is called Man Bites Dog. How does that relate to just a philosophy? It doesn't. We're making it up as we go along. Great.
The Middle East. i24NEWS is a witness. Our journalists live and breathe there every day. Get all the latest global news from our studios in Tel Aviv, New York, Washington, and Paris. Anytime, anywhere. Download the i24NEWS app, available on Roku, Amazon Fire, Apple, and Google stores. i24NEWS, see beyond.
I'm Emily Francis on i24NEWS. Join us on Trending right here on the show that shines the light on the many amazing people doing positive work to inspire. This is the show about building bridges.
We're going to prepare 2 dishes out of 7. It's part of a special meal that we're doing once in a while, a monochromatic meal. That means that each dish has just one color. We're going to make the green dish and the white dish. This meal is part of actually a bigger project that comes to combine together food and art. If food can perceive this art and how the different senses affect the flavor. Try to connect every dish and every color to kind of sensation that I want to give to the audience. So for example, the green dish, it's my sensation of going in the forest or in the Israeli forest, let's say, and try to look for different herbs. It's just a mixture of different greens and vegetables. But it's all familiar to the palate because everything is from this territory. The white one is like something which is clean as you're born. They say that we as people, we come from the oceans. So I thought about really this sensation of the ocean. People are affected by childhood memories, by the cultural context, and therefore if I put this like green dish, which is Israeli forest, it will affect more people in Israel. So it's a huge combination of the different senses and also different cognitive values that people hold individually. By doing this special meal, this is what we're looking for. To make the experience even more meaningful to the person who eats, that it will be once in a lifetime experience.
And welcome back to the Spin Room. We are here with our press gurus who are going to be discussing the United States decision to close the PLO mission in Washington. That was the decision that was taken, first of all, saying the Palestinians were not going along and making steps to make genuine peace with Israel, but also as a protest against Palestinian attempts to get Israeli leaders prosecuted at the International Criminal Court in The Hague. Here are our press gurus, Mike Wagenheim, Owen Alterman and Mohammed Al-Qassim, here to present the stories that caught your eyes in these respective beats. So, Mike, diplomatic correspondent, let's start with you. How has the Israeli press been covering this issue?
Haaretz on the left covering it mainly from the Palestinian side. The day after, their headline reading, Palestinian officials, U.S. closing PLO mission is quote-unquote vicious blackmail. This is the way they labeled it, also noting that the American leftist J Street group condemned the move, sabotaging the Israeli-Palestinian peace process. Meanwhile, the Jerusalem Post noting that the Trump administration's supposed method of operation here is to broaden the pressure on the PA. They've already cut funding. Obviously, the Jerusalem move in recognition of the capital, the move of the embassy. This is just another move in that plan, according to the view of the Jerusalem Post, at least the day after this announcement was made. What I couldn't find was an Israeli outlet that was asking the question, if the Trump administration is willing to put this kind of pressure on to get people back to the table, what are they going to do when people are at the table? They're going to apply even more pressure. Nobody's asking. The Trump administration keeps saying, "Well,
do they have any leverage left to get them towards an agreement once they're at the table?"
Exactly. What's left at that point? Even if the Palestinians return, and if this is what's going to get them to the table to begin with, the Trump administration keeps saying, "Well, we're not going to pressure anybody into making a deal. We're not going to force concessions." If they're forcing this to get them to the table, of course they're going to try to force.
Perhaps that's where the carrots kick in after so much time.
I just want to point out to our group and to our viewers that this remains a hypothetical situation.
Very hypothetical, but I would still say, even though the Israelis haven't had to suffer the Trump administration's wrath to this point, if this is going to be the method, is to just pulverize and pound into submission, I'd be a little bit worried if I were the Israelis, because if it gets to the table and the Trump administration sees an opening, I think the Israelis might, in the end, have to make concessions.
Trump has suggested on a number of occasions that Israel was going to have to pay a very large price for his taking Jerusalem off the table, as he said. Are you sensing concern within the Israeli media that Trump could then flip and impose the whole of his weight on Israel as well to try to force it to make concessions it doesn't want to make?
No, because I think at this time the consensus opinion is twofold. Number one, Palestinians aren't going to come to the table no matter what. Secondly, this peace plan, likely, it's Mohammed and I have been saying for a year now, will never see the light of day. I think that seems to be the prevailing opinion of the Israeli media, but you just never know.
Okay. Palestinians are responding to this, and this is part of what I'm going to talk about, saying this is silly because President Trump and his administration didn't leave anything to pressure the Israelis on if someone gets to the table. Jerusalem is gone. The refugee issue is about to, if not already gone.
Let's really look at your beat. What is the Middle East media saying about this?
I'm going to focus on what the Palestinian media is saying. The Middle East kind of agrees with the Palestinians. Well, you guessed right, and that's why you are there, and we are maybe here. Al-Quds newspaper out of East Jerusalem in Arabic came out with a huge headline, and the first top part of the front page of its edition on that day, saying that the U.S. administration closes PLO office in Washington in response to the leadership's refusal to accept the deal of the century and negotiate with Israel. Basically, what they're saying is President Mahmoud Abbas's position on, and his reaction to what President Trump has done since December 6, when he recognized Jerusalem as the capital of Israel, in May when he moved the embassy from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem, and the aid cutting and so forth. That's blackmail. That's what they get for their position and refusal. And also they're saying that they're not going to accept the deal of the century, even though many still question, Mike, whether there will be a deal of the century or not.
So is this a widespread perception then that the United States is trying to blackmail the Palestinian authorities into a deal? They don't call it pressure, they call it blackmail?
That's the belief. That's in fact, many called it also a war against the Palestinians, and that's exactly the belief. Another headline coming to us from a news site, a Palestinian news site, Watan, and it says Abu Ordena, that's the Palestinian spokesman for the President Mahmoud Abbas, Washington's decision to close the PLO office will not change change our positions, and that's why I don't really think that the Palestinians will go to the negotiations table anytime soon.
Oh, we're still going to for face value. Perhaps it's spin. It's
well, I have been following this for quite some time, and I have to tell you that it's political suicide for President Abbas. It's political suicide for the Fatah movement, for the Palestinian Authority, if they actually go to the to any negotiations with President Trump and Israel without something heavy, without something huge. And by taking Jerusalem, taking the refugee issue, moving the embassy, cutting aid, and with the refugee issue and the position on it, there is nothing left. President Abbas is exposed. And in order for him to continue being the president of the Palestinian Authority and have a strong position that keeps him in power, he will not accept any sort of either reconnecting with the U.S. administration or going to any negotiation table. And
because he's an old sickly man looking for a legacy.
This has nothing to do with his age, actually. And if it does, he doesn't want to leave on a bad note. He doesn't want to be the one that sells Jerusalem, as everyone is saying among Palestinians and Arabs. He is taking a very tough stance right now for a number of reasons.
Okay, Owen, normally in the international press, the closure of less than an embassy, just a mission, wouldn't make headlines, but this time
it has made headlines, Eylon, especially in the United States, and we are actually not going to look at the New York Times, at the Wall Street Journal, at the Washington Post, at the usual suspects. We're going to go and do that journalistic thing and look at middle American newspapers. And the first one actually out of Youngstown, Ohio, Eylon, it doesn't get more Trump country than Youngstown, Ohio. And you're absolutely right. That was the first thing that I noticed in looking into this. This newspaper cared enough to write an editorial about this, which itself says something about the salience of this issue and the continuing resonance of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Even in Youngstown, Ohio, again, a town on the Ohio-Pennsylvania border.
We have it up on the screen here.
We have it up on the screen. Again, this newspaper, even though it's in the heartland of Trump country alone, again, a traditionally Democratic area, newspaper not necessarily supportive of the 45th president, runs an editorial slamming the decision, again, saying the president should go read his own book on the art of the deal, that he doesn't really understand negotiations. If
his
this
own book,
is...
which he may not have read because we know he certainly did not write.
Well, put that also to the side, but yes. So again, the newspaper slamming the move, again saying that it doesn't really show any knowledge of the Arab-Israeli conflict or even knowledge of how negotiations should be structured. So again, the Youngstown Vindicator, I love that name of a newspaper, the Vindicator, taking aim at Donald Trump's decision.
Okay, what else?
Next up is Springfield, Massachusetts. Not really middle America geographically, but maybe culturally to some degree. A newspaper called The Republican, but again, not a newspaper so supportive of President Donald Trump. But interestingly, Eylon, this newspaper really backing up the decision, taking in many sense a hardline pro-Israel stance. Again, the newspaper saying we don't always agree with Donald Trump. There are plenty of ways to take aim at his policies, but on this one he made the right call. Importantly, the editorial says the Palestinians in the 25 years of the Oslo era have never negotiated in good faith, and therefore there's no justification for keeping this mission open. Now again, I don't know what a historian would say about that claim that the Palestinians have never negotiated in good faith over the course of the entire 25 years, no matter who was in power and what stage of the peace process it was. But again, the views of this newspaper. But again, it is interesting to see a newspaper that it comes out against Donald Trump in a very liberal state, coming out and really taking, supporting this decision.
Extraordinary, because they're not focusing on local news. They're focusing on an issue that is so far away. Why do you think that that issue grips these audiences?
Because it brings together, Eylon, two issues that are that really raise everyone's passions. One is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, and the other is the issue that there is no issue that raises more passions than Donald Trump. And this issue brings them together, and again, not for the first time. So again, getting attention, interestingly enough, not only on the East Coast and the West Coast and in the highbrow journals of Europe, but also an editorial from the newspaper in Youngstown, Ohio, and in Springfield, Massachusetts. As you said, I found that fascinating.
Ohio is a fairly large Jewish population. Cincinnati, Cleveland, Columbus, and our population also.
That's true, though not necessarily in Youngstown.
And which is, but then that's interesting how what we're seeing is the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, as in many cases, acting as a proxy for fighting other political battles.
Yeah, that's true, but that's the interesting thing about the Springfield editorial, is that for them it's not. They say we don't like Donald Trump. We take him on all sorts of policy issues, but on this one he made the right call. Certainly that's the kind of editorial that if you're sitting in the Israeli embassy in Washington or the Consulate General in Boston, you will be thrilled with this kind of editorial, especially given the widening partisan gap in the United States. To see that kind of editorial really makes your day.
Okay, well, we are going to go for a very short break right now. When we come back, we will be back with our press gurus, not focusing on the closure of the PLO mission in Washington, instead picking their favorite stories that caught their eye in the international press over the last week. We are taking a very short break. We'll be back on the Spin Room in just a minute.
i24NEWS.
The Middle East, cradle of civilization, epicenter of the major crisis and conflicts that affect our world today. i24NEWS is a witness. Our journalists live and breathe there every day. Get all the latest from our studios in Tel Aviv, New York, Washington, and Paris. As news happens where it happens. i24NEWS. See beyond.
We heard you loud and clear. You want more clear cut? You got it. Clear Cut Plus gives us an extra half an hour to give you more of the news that matters. We cut through the noise, we cut to the chase, and we cut out the BS. Join me, Michelle McCory, on Clear Cut and Clear Cut Plus for the clearer picture.
Fearless, timely, and always engaging. Every night, David Schuster brings the news from around the world to your front door. Watch Stateside, weeknights at 9 p.m. Eastern, only on i24NEWS. There's more to the news than meets the eye. Many voices, many faces, with interests often at odds. We take you deeper beyond the headlines, inside the drama, the controversy, bringing you fresh insights into the conflicts, breakthroughs, heartaches, and victories shaping our world. Perspectives. There's more than just one view.
Welcome back to the Spinner Room. We're here with our press gurus presenting the stories that caught their eye in the international press in the last week. A diplomatic correspondent, Mike Wagenheim, let's start with you. What caught your eye in the Israeli press?
Well, one of the huge stories here this past week from the Times of Israel, specifically the Israeli ambassador to the U.S., Ron Dermer, acknowledged that he was warned about sexual predatory behavior by the spokesman for Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. The Times of Israel really did a great job being on top of this story. They've been following it for a while it was kind of simmering and then burst out the scene.
They ran the expose about 12 women complaining of improper behavior.
Exactly. They've been holding the information for a while until they could get more confirmation. But now the Civil Service Commission here in Israel is going to look into what Ron Dermer knew and what, if anything, he passed along to the Prime Minister, and if he passed along information, why wasn't it acted upon?
Dermer, of course, saying he didn't pass it on to the people.
Dermer saying he didn't because he didn't feel there was a crime that was committed by Keys. Under Israeli law, sexual harassment can be construed as a crime, so technicalities here, but certainly with Dermer and Netanyahu so close, one would think that some whispers would have been forwarded to Jerusalem, but Dermer says otherwise.
Okay, what else has caught your eye?
From Israel Hayom, they cover the end of the tenure or upcoming end of the tenure of Israeli Police Chief Roni Al-Sheikh. He has been leading the corruption investigations against Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu. Police chiefs here in Israel are generally appointed to 3-year terms with a quote-unquote customary 4th year that must be added on by the Internal Security Minister. As of late, those years have not been added on over the last 10, 15 years or so. Al-Sheikh, shockingly, is not going to get that extra year.
Why is that attracting attention? It's a civil service appointment. What's interesting about that?
A civil service appointment that could rock the foundations of Israeli democracy based on the results of these police investigations. But Gilad Erdan, the Internal Security Minister, says he's had disagreements with Al-Sheikh, not necessarily about the corruption investigations, but other matters related to the police. In any case, Al-Sheikh will be gone in December, but these police investigations that have been going on for years now supposedly will be wrapped up by then.
Mohammed, I imagine the broader Middle East media are not obsessing over the non-extension of the Israeli police chief's tenure.
You don't even know who he is. So let's move into two old yet new headlines in the Middle East. We'll start with Iran. And there was a meeting with the former Secretary of State, John Kerry, with the current Iranian Foreign Minister, Zarif, and the headline reads from the Arab News newspaper, former U.S. Secretary of State Kerry under fire for back-channel talks with Iran. This is a big news in the U.S., but also made big news here.
Iran, American citizens not allowed to conduct private diplomacy.
Not only that, Iran is trying to capitalize, Eylon, on a U.S. citizen, someone who signed the nuclear agreement with them, and saying that some Americans are still in favor of the Iran nuclear agreement. So this is a huge story, at least for most of the Middle East. Another headline Syria, and the expected military offensive in the north of the country. Ayub, that is
in the Idlib province.
In the Idlib province. Ayub is the Syrian defense minister, is in the north. He is in the Idlib province, monitoring and supervising the expected military offensive there. And that is the Syrian newspaper saying our air defenses responded to Israeli aggression. Another airstrike last night, late our time, near the Damascus airport. Some say it was Israeli. At least Syria has accused Israel of carrying out another airstrike in Syria, maybe targeting...
Are we seeing pressure in the press for some retaliation against Israel?
No, they say when it's time, what they're saying is that Israel is trying to assist the terrorists, the opposition in Syria, while the Syrian military is making and gaining ground and territory and gaining the upper hand in Syria.
Okay, Owen Altman, the international press.
International press, Eylon. We're going to zoom in on one story and one character. This was the week of Julia Salazar, maybe the most famous candidate for New York State Senate in history. Again, made headlines over the past few weeks for not always being 100% honest about her background. Of course, a left-wing candidate took on an incumbent affiliated with Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez and Bernie Sanders. Here's a column from the New York Times, Barry Weiss, really taking aim at Julia Salazar, saying, among other things, at the end of the day, this is similar to Donald Trump. Donald Trump always going and telling lies, in her words, and now we also have another post-truth politician from the left in the guise of Julia Salazar.
She's been caught out on a number of things, claiming that she was born in Colombia. She wasn't, claiming to have been Jewish. She was, in fact, a Christian in the past, correct?
Well, claiming to be born in Colombia and wasn't. That's true. She claimed to be working class. By all accounts, that seems not to have been true. She did not graduate from Columbia University, unlike what she had said. As for the Jewish identity, it's a very complicated question. She would argue that she's Jewish and is identified as Jewish. There are other people who argue she doesn't. But in any event, there's no question that that absolutely fired up the American Jewish press, which brings us to our second item from the Forward opinion editor putting out a piece this week. Again, Julia Salazar getting a lot of attention in the Forward over the past week or two, really coming out and defending her, and also saying importantly that Julia Salazar's win shows that the generational divide in the Jewish community is not just about Israel, it's about other issues as well, including that issue of who can claim Jewish identity. Can Julia Salazar, because she says her father says that he had Sephardic Jewish ancestry, that she then becomes closer to Judaism, does not necessarily undergo a formal conversion? Should that person count as Jewish or not? Again, she points to a generational divide on that.
A generational divide. If we're living in an age where people accept that people can choose to self-identify as being another gender, then why not another religion without going through formal rabbinical courts? A hot issue as always. Mike Wagenheim, Owen Alterman and Mohammed Al-Qasim, our press gurus. Thank you very much. American Jews seem to stand divided on many political issues, both international and domestic. Now, with midterm elections coming up in November, the American Jewish Congress wants to make it easier for the Jewish community to be informed on the candidates' positions when it comes to Israel and Jewish-related issues. Our Tal Heinrich sat down with the organization's president to find out just what Jewish voters need to know and why he thinks President Trump's legacy may last beyond his presidency.
Jake Rosen, president of the American Jewish Congress, thank you for sitting down with i24 News. What is the Jewish Voters Guide? How does it work?
Well, we thought that during these difficult times for all religions, but certainly for the Jewish religion as well, and the Jewish community, that we would present to the Jewish community and others interested an opportunity to see where the candidates stand on Jewish-related issues, anti-Semitism, BDS, Israel, Palestinians, and so on. And so we developed a website where people can come and see the candidates in this midterm election and their views on those issues.
How did you gather the information on where each candidate stands on specific issues?
Well, it's readily available to the public. So we go through each of the candidates. We're primarily list the Senate candidates, so it's limited to something below 100, and then we also identify and highlight other candidates who may not be on that list when they take some strong positions against Israel or against the Jewish community.
So the Trump administration peace plan, it might or might not be dead upon arrival, but even if it doesn't play out the way the administration would have wanted to, why are these efforts around it still important? Why does it still matter? The fact that it's trying to maybe change the narrative. Will it last?
If he's had some progress, I would tend to think that Americans will take a look at the progress and say, hey, this works. Let's continue in this direction. If there's no progress, then I'm afraid that if the Republicans are no longer in power, we may get back to the traditional way of negotiating with the Palestinians.
Jack Rosen, thank you for your time.
No, thank you.
Now we're in the studio with Kalev Ben-David, the co-host of The Rundown on i24NEWS for Kalev's Corner. Kalev, some of the stories that have been catching your eye this week.
Well, let's talk Eurovision. I know you're a music fan.
Let's talk Eurovision,
and of course, Eurovision is going to be in Tel Aviv, not in Jerusalem. It was finally decided and announced
next year in Tel Aviv.
Right. It's funny because
our prayer for millennia.
Right. Netta Barzilai, when she won the Eurovision, she said actually next year in Jerusalem.
I love you, Israel. Next year in Jerusalem.
But you know what? Another Eurovision contestant, not winner, in 2015, an Israeli, Nadav Gaj, he predicted it would be in Tel Aviv. Let's take a look. His song actually was used on the clip announcing it, the decision to put it to Tel Aviv.
Let's take foresight? Let's see.
Let's hear this brief clip, if we can, with the lyrics. Let me show you Tel Aviv.
That's a very good tourist spot. Makes me want to step outside the studio. Go straight outside.
And you know who's happy that it's going to be in Tel Aviv, I think?
Who?
Iceland.
Iceland?
Why Iceland? Because in Iceland, 17,000 people signed a petition supporting the BDS movement to boycott it being in Israel.
Not a small number in a country of 300,000 people.
Well over 5% of the population.
Yes.
But once it was decided it was going to be in Tel Aviv, not the disputed capital of Jerusalem, the nation of Iceland announced this weekend it would take part in the Eurovision.
And of course, that's something that's been very controversial inside Israel, where the Eurovision would be. We had the culture minister saying, if it's not in Jerusalem, then as far as I'm concerned, it shouldn't be in Israel at all. But the ultra-Orthodox weren't very happy with the idea of rehearsals on the Sabbath.
A finer point alone, it's not at all unusual for Eurovision not to be in the capital of the country. You're from the UK, 2 cities that hosted Eurovision outside London.
Birmingham.
Lovely Birmingham and Brighton. So Tel Aviv, that's like all equivalent to Brighton. Next year in Tel Aviv in Eurovision.
We're certainly looking forward to it, but not to the traffic and congestion that it will cause. Kalev, what's your next story?
Well, let's talk about Hurricane Florence. It is, of course, a devastating storm, especially in the Carolinas. One channel that's been covering it very closely is called the Weather Channel. This is alone, if you're not in America, you don't know, there's an entire channel,
that's a whole channel
devoted to the weather.
It has.
And they did a very impressive graphic. Let me show you, showing the impact of the flooding in North Carolina that they created. Let's take a look at that.
Once that water comes up to 3 feet, you can see it would be coming up my shins up towards my waist. This could be enough to knock you off your feet. It could even float some cars that could be parked on the side of the roadway. This is extremely dangerous, but once we get up into that 6-foot range, look at how high this water goes. Winds pick everything up. Cars would be floating at this point. This water's over my head.
I'll have to get our graphics team to take a look at that. We have to do that as well, Kalev.
Indeed, and that is an impressive. The Weather Channel. This is their moment. But the guy criticized one of their reporters. Looked like he was faking a little bit the effect of the wind. He was being hit by the wind while people were walking behind them. So the Weather Channel, some good moments, some not so good.
Okay. What next, Kalev?
Well, let's talk about your home country, the UK, and the Novichok attack. The Novichok, we had those 2 Russians who said they went to Salisbury to see the beautiful cathedral.
Which has a spire 123 meters high.
Well, except now TripAdvisor has decided it's going to freeze all recommendations that are being made for Salisbury. Why? Because they are getting tons of fake reviews of Salisbury on TripAdvisor.
Of course, these men accused by the British state of being spies claim they were tourists.
Came all the way from Russia to the Spire, which is 123 meters tall. You know, wonderful place to visit. Glad we came. We came 2 times. Just a short 3,000-kilometer hop from Moscow.
What's the next one?
Okay, and then there was another review. This by Mark. Me and my co-assassin, tourist, went there because the big man, Putin, needed a loose end sorting out. Photos of the Spire for his photo collection of massive erections. Little shot of Putin there. It was a bit cold and we didn't like it much. So as you can see, Salisbury getting perhaps a little too much unwanted attention over this thing.
The way the world is now, you can either laugh or cry, and satire is certainly taking off like never before. I do wonder, I would love to watch a movie about 2 Russian tourists who fulfill the dream of a lifetime visiting Salisbury and get mistaken for Russian spies and assassins by Britain.
British press also just reporting they apparently had a good time in London the night before.
A good time with drugs and a prostitute. Indeed. Kalev Ben-David, thank you very much. That brings us to the end of the Spinner Room. As always, do follow us online on Facebook and on Twitter. I'm Eylon Levy, and thanks for watching.